I would like to request you all to sit down on the seat and take your seats, please. I would like to request everyone to settle down for the next session, please. Perfect happiness is beautiful sunset, the giggle of a grandchild, the first snowfall. It's the little things that make happy moments, not the grand events, because joy comes in sips, not gulps. Namaste, adab, and a very good afternoon, everyone present here. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Ahmedabad International Literature Festival, I'm your host for this afternoon, Samira Hydri. I extend a very warm and hearty welcome to each one of you here. It's a beautiful afternoon. You all are looking glorious, gorgeous, handsome, and the most amazingly nice people here. So, first pose I would like to thank you all for taking the time out of your heavy schedules and marking the spectacular afternoon with your glorious presence. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that why we have been gathered here for. So for now, we'll just start with the cultural diplomacy in the digital era. So in this regard, we'll have some honorable, distinguished guests and the most brilliant guests we have. Like before I invite them, I will just have a brief biography of them for you. So first, I'm going to start with Miss Sarah Ziebell. Sarah Ziebell worked in New York City as a curator and archivist for the New York Public Library and also a lecturer and preservationist for New York University before joining the Department of State in 2010. She currently holds a prestigious position of Regional Public Engineering Specialist at US Embassy in New Delhi, other than holding a master's degree in library and information science with a postgraduate endorsement in media asset management from the University of Texas in Austin. Ziebell is a certified archivist too. So our next guest will be Miss Alison Reilly. Alison Reilly has worked in the area of the local development and the social inclusion for many years in Ireland and spent 2 years in the Ministry of Social Development in New Zealand. She then moved into the cultural sector and worked for International Film and Arts Festival in Ireland. Alison joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in 2018 and was posted in Mumbai as Deputy Consul General in March 2019. A big round of applause for her. So our next guest will be Gaël de Kerguenec. Mr. Gaël de Kerguenec is a painter, poet, and linguist. Is currently director Alliance Francaise Ahmedabad. As a poet, he initially sought to recreate the feelings generated by his poem to move towards his present credo, painting ideas like the force craved into the brush stroke, the loading of inks in colors, and how to distribute them into rice paper are specific to each work generating a constant renewal of sensations and feelings. So the next guest will be Mr. Frédérick Lavoie. Mr. Frédérick Lavoie is a Canadian writer and a journalist, most noted for his book Avant la paix. So Voyage à Cuba avec George Orwell, which won the Governor General's Award for French Language Non-Fiction in 2018. He is an independent foreigner correspondent who work has appeared primarily in La Presse and the Le Devoir French newspapers, and he has recently published a book on the release of Orwell's classic 1984 in Communist Cuba, Ukraine, a fragmentation, 2015, and he currently divides his time between Montreal and Mumbai. And the last but not the least guest of this afternoon is Mr. Asad Lalljee. As the SYP of ISAR Group and the CEO of AVID, learning. Asad Lalljee brings years and years of experience in the fields of advertising, marketing, and the business development to the table. So additionally, he is a curator of a prestigious Royal Opera House, Mumbai. He has been the mastermind behind the cultural collaborations between AVID and some of the countries and regions' largest cultural platforms, including JLF, the Serendipity Arts Festival, and the Kala Goda Arts Festival. Magazines like Bazaar and Verve have featured him for his genius curatorial craftsmanship, and he is one of the Indians' most well-known faces in the world of the trade and culture. So I would like to welcome all precious guests here. So big round of applause for them. So as I already mentioned, that today we're going to talk about the cultural diplomacy in the digital era, which is soft power. So I would like to ask Mr. Asad Lalljee to start with the session.
Thank you. Oh, wow, that's loud. After all that happiness and all those formulas you've heard, now let's talk about some diplomacy and cultural diplomacy, especially in the digital age. And I'm just going to make a few opening remarks because I don't know how familiar people are with this topic. I wasn't that much till I started reading, and I read some more. Culture can be a glue that binds civil society, and in this respect, diplomacy has become a vital part of a nation's machinery. Cultural diplomacy is often considered as an intersectional concept between new public diplomacy and international cultural relations. And the process of diplomatic exchange and interaction has changed. It's no longer we have two ambassadors sitting across the room, face to face, shaking hands. Understanding and interacting with a culture of a nation is essential to international cooperation. Culture, globalization, and international relations are becoming increasingly more interdependent, and mastering the three of them develops the softer power of a country. And it leads to successful collaboration, cooperation, commerce, and increasing interlinked world that we all live in. And today, our topic is more specific to the digital age. What's happened is with the proliferation of data. In fact, there's one stat that I thought was very interesting, which says that it's estimated by 2025, that's in 5 years, the number of data-driven interactions per day, per person, is going to increase to 1 digital interaction every 18 seconds. So you know that data has obviously invaded our lives. It's going to only increase. So what has that done to diplomacy, to cultural diplomacy? And I have an esteemed panel out here who are doing some path-breaking work representing their countries officially. Frédérick is now officially representing Canada today. But I just have one example from a recent example. Last month at the Royal Opera House that I curate, we partnered with the BBC to present a film. And we had Sir David Attenborough. He joined through video conferencing. And we had students from Mumbai, and students from South Africa simultaneously patched in. And we had an interaction and a cultural exchange, and it was to do with wildlife preservation and conservation. And so it made me think, is this the new form of cultural diplomacy? So I'm going to start. I've made lots more opening remarks, which I will not make, and I'm going to start with Sarah. Looking at how, I would pass it to you though. Sarah, in the US Embassy, you manage a portfolio that includes American Spaces. So can you tell us more about that concept? Tell us more of the concept of Mission India within the scope of American Spaces, and how you all have expanded the mandate and how you all are using technology.
Thank you, Asad. So yes, American Spaces, it kind of sounds like a strange term, but essentially this is our brand for our American cultural centers. They've had different names over the years, but American Spaces is essentially what we call them. Our cultural centers are often a mix of libraries with peer-reviewed current information for the public to access, and also educational services, everything from advising young people who would like to study in the US for higher education, to helping people improve their English skills. And then the final part is culture. So we definitely believe and the power of people-to-people connections. And so through our American Spaces network, we offer a lot of cultural programming. In India, we have 6 American Spaces. We're lucky to have one here in Ahmedabad, the American Corner Ahmedabad, which is a partnership with IAES. And we have Tejal here if anybody would like to know more about that. So I would say our American Spaces are really platforms for connecting on the people-to-people level, Indians to Americans. As you mentioned, certainly we use a lot of digital diplomacy and a lot of digital connectivity to make our work extend beyond the 4 walls of the American Spaces that we have. We very recently started doing a lot of virtual dialogues, connecting young people throughout South Asia with Americans on certain, topical issues and stuff. So that's definitely opened our access, I think, to a wider audience, often people who couldn't get there.
Are these like Google Hangouts, or what are they?
So we use a platform called Zoom. We kind of use whatever we need to, but we like Zoom, and we're doing these very regularly throughout India. So I would say digital goes hand in hand with cultural diplomacy these days. You can't separate them, and it only gives us more options, I think, for how we connect with people, what platforms we decide to use, and make the information that we can share and the connections we can share as valuable as possible.
Thank you. So we're going to go to Alison next, just to make sure the mic doesn't have to cross around twice. No, I'm just kidding. But Alison, we spent some time earlier chatting, and I was actually, sharing my layman's knowledge of Ireland, and I used all the possible cliches of the shamrock and the Claddagh and St. Patrick's Day. But it was very interesting, our conversation, and you mentioned St. Patrick's Day as an important anchor campaign for y'all guys to spread as a cultural interchange. So do you want to just share some thoughts on that, and especially what you're doing in the digital space with Halloween?
Hello. For people who don't know, Ireland is a very small country to the west of the United Kingdom, and our population is only 4.8 million. But we Irish people have emigrated a lot over many centuries, so there are about 60 to 80 million people in the world who consider themselves Irish. So a lot of our cultural interaction with people is through our diaspora, and one of the traditions that left the shores and spread around the world was St. Patrick's Day, and celebrating this as our kind of national celebration. And that is the anchor for our cultural exchanges, but also for our political engagement. Our politicians and ministers use St. Patrick's Day as an occasion to meet politicians and ministers from around the world. So this year they were in 56 different countries. Our Prime Minister every year meets the President of the United States on St. Patrick's Day. I don't think any other country has that regular contact, and it's because over the years we've built, people recognize St. Patrick's Day as Irish, and they associate certain practices with it, and fun and music and dance and storytelling and Guinness and everything that's green, and we've managed to use that as a form of our way into diplomacy. And one of the access to kind of spotlighting Ireland for trade and investment, but also politically. And then the other festival, we kind of 4 festivals during the year we're trying to work on, but Halloween is originally an Irish, or based on an Irish concept. So we have a digital campaign going on at the moment called something like I've forgotten the title of it. That's terrible.
Halloween's over right now, so we're okay.
It's something like the home of Halloween. The home of Halloween. So that is a completely digital-based, animated cartoons, kind of reclaiming the whole myths and legends around Halloween and how they're actually thousands of years old and the source of it. We only do that as in a digital sphere, and the amount of engagement we've had about that, especially in North America and in Europe, is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And that, again, increases awareness of Ireland where it is. And since we are tiny, any awareness of Ireland is considered very positive.
And I believe you have an author at the festival here, and I met you yesterday in Mumbai at a festival. You have the same author there. So talk about now Ireland is making a conscious effort for bringing in your talent, whether it's authors or filmmakers, into India. So tell us a little more.
Yes, so our consulate in Mumbai is very new. We're just 8 months old. And we are very much focusing on culture and sharing cultural ideas and finding commonality between our cultures as a way of raising awareness about Ireland, that it exists. I mean, we do have a cricket team now that people recognize we're a real country. We have a cricket team. That has, ironically, has made a huge impact diplomatically in India. But what we do is we try and support our authors, musicians, like other countries do, to make connections and start that cultural exchange. And I suppose in Ireland we've always had a reputation of being great musicians, great storytellers, and that soft power is what we've always used to bring attention to the country.
And you have U2 coming to Bombay?
Yes.
And Delhi, I guess, yeah.
And they are very politicized as well, so they tick all your boxes.
Thank you. She's Frédérick. Frédérick, as I mentioned earlier, the rest of the panelists represent their country in the formal capacity. You're a Canadian citizen, so you're unofficially representing Canada today. I'm kidding. But earlier we also spoke that I had the good fortune of being interviewed by the Consul General in Mumbai, Annie Dubé, for her podcast, the Canada and India podcast, where she was trying to look at relationships, whether it's business or cultural, and she's using podcast, which is not a very high-tech medium or digital medium. It is a very basic medium, but she's using it very effectively for public diplomacy and also cultural diplomacy, because where I fit in and you fit in would probably be the cultural part. Are there any other such examples? I know it doesn't have to be digital, because you can also talk about your translations project. And also, because what I find interesting for India is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a large part of your government is of Indian origin, the present government. So that would also build the bridges closer, because we are sitting in India. So I'm thinking of cultural diplomacy more to do with with Canada and India at this point.
Yes, indeed, there's a lot of people from India, especially from Punjab, of course. Actually, there's more Sikh MPs in the Parliament of Canada than in the Parliament of India now, and more ministers as well. In the previous government now, we're still about to form a new government, but before that there were 4 Sikh ministers, whereas there are 2 in the Modi government, so they're very well represented. I mean, they're very active in politics. What I can say, as you said, I'm not officially representing my country, but I have been a representative of my country in cultural events abroad. So that's how I have lived directly this cultural diplomacy. In March this year, I went across India during the Semaine de la Francophonie, so the Francophonie week. I went in different Alliances Françaises here. Gaël hosted me here at the Alliance Française in Ahmedabad. I went to Delhi, to Chandigarh, to Bangalore, to Bombay. I think I missed one now. And this was sponsored by the Canadian consulate in Mumbai, because they wanted a Canadian to represent them across India. So that's one way. Then I've been also in book fairs in Switzerland, in book fair in Cuba, still as an author. So I think this is not exactly the digital part so it's nothing new, but Canada continue to do that. And I think there's another aspect of it that is less official, but as a writer, I can apply for grants to travel abroad also. And so, I don't think that cultural diplomacy is necessarily always the government finding the people that they will send abroad, but it's by creating institutions that allow artists to go abroad with funds from the government and at the end to have an impact and to make people curious about a country. And in my case, yes, I am Canadian, but I'm also Québécois, so I'm a French Canadian. And therefore, I worked often with two institutions. With in Mumbai, we have the Canadian consulate, but we also have the Quebec office. And they have different strategies.
From the same floor.
Yeah, they're on the same floor, but depending on who's governing in Quebec, they don't have necessarily the same relations, I guess. Because if you have a government that is more for independence of Quebec, let's say, maybe they're not so interested in collaborating with Canada. But yeah, so it's interesting that there's also these sub-states like Quebec, and I guess Maharashtra or Gujarat also have their own diplomacy. If I may just end on a note to talk about Indian cultural diplomacy, not the official one, but the one you encounter everywhere in the world. A week ago, I was in Slovenia, a small country in Eastern Europe, and I met a refugee from Somalia. I was with my wife, who's Indian, and he started to talk to us in Hindi, because he was watching Bollywood movies since his childhood, you know, and this I've encountered in many places. So Bollywood is a real factor for Indian diplomacy.
That's right. That's the next part of the conversation. So I think the
so-
mic
sorry
has to
about
part on. Gaël, you know, the Alliance Française, I mean, 25 years ago, I learned French, at the Alliance Française in Bombay. But, you know, it's one of the most successful models of international cultural exchanges. And, you know, language as a form of diplomacy, obviously French is not only for the French, but it's also for many countries, including Canada. But, you know, as a platform, and also a very interesting development that happened a couple of years ago was the one, at least for India, was the Bonjour India platform that was created by the Institute of France, you know, which kind of promotes the cross of arts and technology and sustainability. Can you tell us more about these strategies and how you all have taken it in the digital world? Because I'm trying to bring all these conversations, since that was the topic given to me, into the digital age. So.
Thank you, Asad. So, yes, the idea of Alliance Française and the idea of Bonjour India, and finally of all the French, I say the word French, that means at the same time a language and a country, but it's much more wide to say a language, is that we all work on cooperation. Alliance Française is before all Indian in India. And that's what was the genius idea that some very enlightened spirit like Louis Pasteur, Ferdinand de Lesseps, made about having people from different culture meeting around a language that can express ideas. French language is a vehicle of ideals, of equality, of liberty, freedom, and of fraternity. So the idea is that before all, when you are in a foreign countries, you must be like people there. And Alliance Française, in India, in Brazil, in 135 countries, is first part of this country. And it's based on French language lovers. From this point, everything is declined. All our idea about meeting and mutual understanding with people is based on this. So it's really also a vehicle of peace. In fact, the idea of Alliance Française is really a vehicle of peace, and that's why sometimes it has been very difficult, you know, for the other countries, and I have seen some other models that are ruled by the government of the country. In fact, they all fail, because the first idea of Alliance Française is that we are from this country. So first of all, we are Alliance Française, we are Indian, and after, we are French. So that's very important, and because of this, we get some real friendship and real motivation from the people here to work together, to have cultural promotion and ideas that we share and we exchange. So about the digital era, it's very important to understand that digital always comes after human. Human comes first. We go to the country, we meet the people face to face. Skype, WhatsApp, all this bullshit is after. First thing, we meet, we hold hands, we hug. This is the most important. After, of course, the digital. Everyone is on his tablet, everyone is playing the phone. We cannot avoid this, but this comes after, always after. First thing, people together, eating together, drinking together, having exchange, conversation, that's the first thing. Everything comes after.
Wonderful. So Sarah, I was very intrigued by your bio, and you're a trained archivist. And, of late I'm trying to archive the Royal Opera House, so that's all on my head at the moment. The mediums to create, record, and showcase and consume culture has changed. Can you just share some thoughts from you're an academic in this aspect?
Absolutely, yeah, I think, and this pertains in such a large respect to digital, right? So for the first 10 years or so of my professional life, I was an archivist, primarily working with the creative community, performing artists and filmmakers, and working on their works that were from maybe 50 years ago. So it was a little bit easier to figure out how to migrate and preserve that work. When digital formats have begun to proliferate, and we can't keep up with the newest software or the newest data files, we run a risk in these first couple of decades of digital of losing so much of our cultural heritage, because the simple pace of technology cannot be matched with the funds available often to archives. And so it concerns me a lot, all of the great work that is happening in the digital space, in the art world and in literature, thinking about how we are going to be able to access that for future generations. Not just the final works, but all those things that historians look at, the raw drafts of things, and all these files along the way, manuscripts and stuff that previous generations of historians always had the opportunity to look at. So it concerns me a lot, and so even in my hat as a diplomat, I have my eyes on cultural heritage preservation very much. And I think this is a time when it makes sense to draw attention to some of these questions of what are we going to do to ensure the longevity of work that's being created so that people can access it for historical reasons in the future. So something that concerns me a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Sure.
In today's day, popular culture and art plays such an important role on how a country or a nation is perceived by the outside world. And film is one of those mediums, Frédérick touched upon it briefly, which is something that most people grapple towards because it's easily understood, it's easily translatable, it's easily, Netflix is changing the game with everything subtitled. We're all watching TV serials and movies from other countries now without giving it a second thought. So language is becoming less of a barrier. There are documentaries as a format being made, which is also telling us a little more about different countries. And if you are interested in a specific thing, there are lovely documentaries to watch. As you mentioned, for India's case, since we're sitting here, Bollywood is our greatest soft power. When you talk about outside, you talked about people know Hindi. I mean, everywhere in the world we travel, we are always, either you're told, first you were told Shami Kapoor, now you're told Shah Rukh Khan. So it is what it is. But how have your countries, and I'll start with Sarah.
Oh, okay.
Alison, sorry. Sarah's had her turn. How have you adapted the content that you're pushing out? I know that St. Patrick's Day we spoke about, Halloween. These are your national things. But are you pushing out, like, for the Irish business community and the Indian business community, which you all are interested in, anything customized content? or you're having them follow what we are doing, or because they are closely aligned with our Make in India, Digital India, all that fun stuff, right?
Yes. Trade is not my area. Yes, we do encourage companies that are interested in coming to India to look at the national schemes that are operating and to link in with those. It helps you to come in tune with what's happening in the country and focuses your mind. And there's an obvious need. Then you can immediately relate to that need. And just as a kind of side thing on the film, Ireland is very often used as a film location. So one of the things we now do is, say, promote Ireland from a tourism point of view. From, say, there's Games of Thrones tours of Ireland in like the 80s and 70s. There were all The Quiet Man, which was a big film, American film with John Wayne in it, set in Ireland. And for years that kept the West Coast going in tourism. And now it's people go to Ireland and they imagine themselves inside these programs that people are watching on Netflix and Amazon Prime.
You mentioned there was one Bollywood film shot there just now.
Ekta Tiger.
Yeah. So, you know, what Switzerland, what Bollywood, I think there was one film called Silsila did to Switzerland, and there was another film, I don't remember the name, but it was shot in Spain. Everybody from India started going to Spain. I think you just need to attract a few more Bollywood stars to Ireland. The Cliffs of Moher are a beautiful location. So, you know, obviously we have either or, whoever wants to jump in this. You know, just speaking again, I'm trying to go back to digital because the topic I was given. But, you know, we have concepts like Incredible India, which was done internationally. It was our public diplomacy, cultural diplomacy project that was used to bring people in to highlight the softer powers of India. Tell us if there are any successful campaigns that France, besides Bonjour India, that your government has done, or could you tell the audience a little bit more about Bonjour India, because I think it's a fabulous platform.
Yes, so the concept of Bonjour India, it's a festival that we want to be regular every year, if we could, but maybe every 2 years. In which we have a meeting between French and Indian artists, or not only French-speaking countries artists, and they have art residents, and for a while some French artists will stay in India and preparing some show that will after have a tour all around India. And so, for example, you can have a concert with some Indian musician, with some French musician. The next edition is in 2020 or 21 now. It will be the end of 20 and 21 because we have here our representative of French Embassy, Sujit, for Campus France, so he is also aware about this program. And this year, I think, we also want to focus on audio visual, so on also cooperation with Bollywood, to have also some ideas of screening some Bollywood movies that would be acted in France, for example, and also having the idea of French artists, French actors coming here also and cooperating. That's why this year, our Delhi embassy sent all the audiovisual service to Mumbai. Now they are based in Mumbai. From this year, it's starting to increase this cooperation around Bollywood. So I think for the next edition of Bonjour India, it will be focused a lot on exchange with Bollywood. And it's interesting because French cinema is, you know, it's like a very about artistic cinema, a little bit complex and something. Bollywood, the image we have is very active and something, so it will be a very good meeting.
I'm still talking in the point of view of an artist, I mean, as a writer, and I was talking about all the grants we get from the different Council of the Arts, the Quebec one or the Canada one. And one thing I forgot to mention is that there is a lot of new digital programs. They really focus on the digital aspect of art. And what is good in that is that if you have a digital program, you are not anymore a Canadian artist. You become an international artist because you're all over the place. So your project instantly become international. So again, I think it is in an indirect way. It is also helping the cultural diplomacy and the soft power of Canada. And since Canada is not a big country, it has to go, you know, I don't think we can conquer India with our culture, you know, conquer the hearts of all Indians. So I think when you are a small country, you have to be more specific too.
But you'll have been quite active. I mean, I work very closely with your consulate in Bombay. I mean, from the Toronto International Film Festival, TIFF, you'll have bringing a lot of movies, and you have Cameron here all the time. In literature, you have many authors coming in, and so they're pretty active presenting. I know Nader was doing a lot of good work from Delhi, and so you all are spreading.
It's good.
Yeah. But I just want I know I was already told that we have to open it up for questions, but I'm not even halfway through my questions, so I'm going to go quick. So, you know, the couple of things, you know, like I have so many thoughts right now, so I'm just going to throw it out and let whoever wants to answer it. But, you know, the face of a diplomat and bureaucracy and the diplomat is changing. And a spokesperson for a country is moving from an ambassador to your sports star, to your Bollywood star, to your, yes, that's my reminder, to your the time is, it's 1:45, so what time do you want me to? Okay. But you started 10 minutes late, my dear. I'm going to ask, yeah. Anybody has any questions, or can I continue? But you always have a question, I've noticed that. We'll give you the last one. No, wait. But, so what is your thoughts? Are diplomats redefining themselves? Are they new forms of political actors, or? I mean, I'm not asking you to talk about the US.
I think Frédérick is the perfect example of this, right? A citizen who is living overseas and representing himself and his work, but also his home country. And so, of course, there are limited numbers of bureaucrats, diplomats, right? That's a good thing. But we have many, many, many Americans who work overseas, live overseas, or travel overseas, and we like them being our cultural ambassadors. We feel that they have so much to offer and different perspectives to share beyond what we could perhaps offer ourselves as diplomats. You have a different level of independence as an independent individual than you would as a government employee. So I think that in terms of the U.S. Embassy, we try to harness our visitors from the United States as much as we can and recognize that certain conversations or presentations are much better made by a sports figure or a chef or an underwater ROV engineer. Yeah, so I think it's great to have people like Frédérick here talking about himself as well as, of course, representing his wonderful country of Canada.
I'm just going to wrap this up, hold on to the mic, and give you all each one last question before we open it up to questions. So in the wave of digital innovation and technological advancements, the effective governance is drowning. Technology, as you mentioned, is changing faster than policies can keep up, and we're paying the price. The last 2 years, we've had data breaches, meddling in elections, the spread of misinformation, false news, increased mistrust, and building walls instead of bridges. So in the midst of this, it's one thing, digital era, I mean, public diplomacy is a must. So, I mean, just from the concept of education and educating people on the benefits of digital ideologies and cultural diplomacy, can you just do one closing comment on that?
Sure, certainly. This is something we're concerned about. It certainly happens in the United States as well as in places where we work overseas. The spread of misinformation via social media, WhatsApp, that kind of thing. Where we work in my space, in American spaces, is often in education with young people. Kind of giving them the tools to be responsible digital citizens, to be able to tell fact from fiction, talking about things like deep fakes and all kinds of the new ways in which disinformation is spreading. So I think for us, we look at it as an opportunity really for conversation about how to build your own skills as a digital citizen. I don't know, Alison, do you have any?
Alison, I'm going to be I mean, you know, we spoke about the business community because there's a business-to-business relation. So if you can just put it into that perspective, is how can Indians better leverage what we are doing to strengthen our ties on the other side, because we always look talking about this side.
How the Indian community. I think since India has such a massive diaspora, there's such goodwill among people of Indian heritage around the world that the ideal thing to do is to link with that wider community, strengthen that, that sense of still being involved with home. And then you will have millions of ambassadors for India who will work all the time in their daily lives to promote where they've come from, to share their culture, to share their experience of the world, and to have those cultural dialogues on a daily basis. But it's really, I know in Ireland, sometimes it took a few decades to get our heads around how to interact with our diaspora. Were these people who had abandoned us, or were they still part of the fold? And I think once the people still living in a country get their heads around that, there's nothing but friendship and opportunities. And I think India has this amazing untapped, or just slightly tapped, resource out there.
Thank you. And, you know, we've not spoken about poetry yet. I know you're a poet, and, you know, so I've just, you know, we spoke about literature, but can poetry be an effective tool for cultural diplomacy?
Alors, yes, poetry is, maybe you want to answer this question? Because just to say that poetry is a good way for people just to learn how to listen someone, also, to listen about something expressing the beauty and something that is maybe something a little bit lighter. It seems a little bit lighter to some heavy debates or something. So, and also it's a vehicle of a culture, so it's very important also to go through poetry. But also the idea is that after the poetry, with the writer, for example, we can have a debate, an exchange. So it's also a starting point to a debate and to exchange some ideas.
I think one interesting thing about poetry is you don't necessarily need to understand any word of it to appreciate it, because it gives you a taste of the language. So sometimes you can listen to poetry, and often there are these kind of bilingual reading where the person will read in the original language, and then you'll have someone reading, and it gives you two different impressions, because it's also about the sound of the poetry.
Just one last comment. You know, a young girl once told me, I was interviewing her for a job, she told, for PR, she says, you know, social media is the new PR. And I just thought about it, I said, it's so true. So is social media the new form of cultural diplomacy?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's where it's happening. I think if a government hasn't understood that yet, they're a bit they're not in the 21st century. And it's the same even for artists. All artists are on social media. I mean, the artist, if you want to create links with other artists or other curator. My wife is a curator, an Indian curator, and that's often how she will find other artists in other countries or in other part of India, and she will connect with them. And so that's very important.
Thank you. Okay, the gentleman, your question before I close.
Before I start my question, the usual build-up, a request to the French delegation.
Which one?
Delegate. I'm not a French. I speak French, but.
You can't escape the responsibility of part of it.
Alors, oui.
One of my earliest influences as a child was reading the book
Les Misérables.
What a wonderful movie, Bollywood movie it would make.
Oh, it's a book or a movie?
It should be shot in Ireland.
Ah oui, ça fait un beau film Bollywood. Yes.
And in opera style as it is. So converting it with songs into a Bollywood movie would be the most ideal way of getting into India.
I suggest you go to the Mami Film Festival and pitch that idea to everyone there. You'll find
For
all the...
For the next Bonjour India.
I'm just coming back to you with the request for the tickets.
Wonderful. I'll send you the tickets.
Now the question. The last that I heard of a definition of culture, if that's the theme, was way back in 1920s, where culture was defined as activity of thought and receptiveness to humane feeling. Now, the key word here is humane feeling. What gets lost in a digital humane feeling. So, what thoughts do you have on bringing in humane feeling in a digital way?
Just before I ask the panelists to, it can never replace the human interaction, the people-to-people interaction. I think we mentioned that a couple of times before. This is just to add to the number of people you can reach out to and the impact you can cause. I mean, it's going to an opera versus seeing an opera recorded at the opera house are two different things. Going to an art gallery, seeing a piece of art versus watching it on Google Culture Lab are two different things. Google Culture Lab gives you that impact to see it, gives you the information, but once you stand in front of the Mona Lisa and look at it, you realize, the lady with the mystic smile. But I'll let the panel answer that.
That's very interesting because it's an aspect I wanted to talk about, is that this digital education, in fact, yes, you're right, it's not human, it's not face-to-face, but we can reach some people that has not access to this education. For example, take Alliance Française. We are in Ahmedabad, we are in Baroda, we are in Surat. Okay, if you are in Rajkot, if you are in another part of Gujarat, you want to learn French. With digital education, you have access to this. So we can have some class with video class or webcam, and at least they have access. If we don't have these digital tools, they just don't have access. So the digital aspect of education is very important to reach some population who are far and who are in the countryside, because everyone is connected. So this point is very positive.
Anybody else? So, there's you want to have a question, right? Just shout.
I think you bring up a really good point, and I think it's some of what we talked about earlier. It's very important these days to be on the right platforms on digital media and on social media. I think that if you're only pushing out your message, you're missing so much. You have to be entering into a conversation and collecting information that can better help inform decisions that are made going forward. So I think that without that element, we're missing a great opportunity for dialogue. So I think that's a very good point that you make.
I'd like to request Muskan Patak for the team AILF to kindly felicitate the speakers.
I could have.
Yes, look at here, please. Yes, look at here.
I insist. It's our culture.
Look at here.